I have to say, I was away last week, and I was looking at the reports about this documentary, and again, the blatant, really obvious, the question marks that would be raised straight away about this kid and how he was filmed. I mean, first of all, it was just continuity. He's wearing, in one scene where it's supposedly him running into a hospital, being in a hospital and coming out again, he's got 3 different pairs of shoes on. He's got a different haircut, you know, in the space of sort of apparently half an hour. You know, grew his hair got shorter again. That, you think, might have just on its own made the editors back in London go, oh, are we sure about this documentary? Who's made it? But it took someone who didn't work at the BBC, who's not a trained reporter, a very short period of time to look at this documentary and work out that this child was not some random innocent Hamas civilian child, but was the child of a Hamas official and featured in a number of reports and a number of online posts. How on earth was this not spotted by senior figures at the BBC before they put it out?
For years, Hamas has skillfully created narratives that were designed to manipulate a credulous Western press like the BBC. And I think they're always eager for emotive tales of Palestinian suffering. So this fell right into their lap. And I think the use of child crisis actors is particularly insidious. It feeds that BBC media machine that really thrives on sentimental, victim-centred storytelling. Now, you might, as you say, expect journalists, at least those deserving of the title, to see through that sort of deception. But instead, the BBC just dutifully broadcast Hamas propaganda, which was neatly gift-wrapped for Western audiences. And British taxpayers are unwittingly underwriting that spectacle. As you said, £400,000 for that documentary.
How? By the way, how did that cost 400 grand?
Well, good question. And I mean, we've seen that, you know...
What, they got gold-plated cameras? What's going on?
Downing Street said that there would be no circumstances in which it would be acceptable for the BBC to have paid money to Hamas, which some of this money might have got there. But that's rich as well, because this government's steadfast support for UNRWA has included £41 million of support this financial year. And we all know that UNRWA is deeply compromised by Hamas and its close ties to terrorism. So probably some of that 41 million of British taxpayers' money is also going that way.
Yes.
I think the point here is that there's a denial among the BBC, and let's face it, not just the BBC, much of the media. Talk's been pretty good. If I dare say their name here, GB News have been pretty good. The rest of the media in this country has been absolutely rotten during this entire war, and long before that. Robert Jenrick said that since October the 7th, that there's been a problem, that the BBC's comprehensively failed the licence fee payer. It's not been since October the 7th. He's wrong. It's been for years or decades. The BBC has an absolute blind spot, if we can call it blind spot. I believe they know about it, so it's not a blind spot. They've got their eyes firmly screwed shut. They don't want to know.
I will go further than that, Jonathan. I would say that the BBC is institutionally racist against Jewish people. I think it's that simple. I think it's that blatant. I've had enough conversations with people who work at the BBC who are concerned, and people who just genuinely just think it's all absolutely fine, their coverage. They have such a blind spot on this issue. They are not a biased, an impartial reporting organisation on this. I mean, it's too often that their own correspondents, their own sources that they are openly citing are easily identifiable as people who not only are either working with Hamas, you know, for whatever reason, but who have actually, on their public postings, have celebrated October the 7th. If you are celebrating the massacre of Jewish innocent civilians, children, on October the 7th, you have no business working for anyone in the West, let alone the BBC.
Did you see this John Donaldson over the last couple of days? First, he posted on X, the propaganda efforts by both Hamas and Israel over the hostage release are pretty nauseating. That Israel had some propaganda efforts over the hostage releases. Is this man on drugs?
Well, but also equivocate. Look, there is a propaganda aspect in terms of we get to see the images and the videos of hostages being reunited with their families and posting from their helicopters. That is all state control. But to equivocate the joyful release of innocent civilians or soldiers taken captive. I mean, you know, if you're a soldier and you're being kept in a tunnel and starved and beaten and tortured, you're no longer being treated as a soldier, you're treating as a hostage. But to equivocate...
Even Donaldson took that down in the end. He said he's taken down the post about the release of hostages and prisoners as part of the Gaza ceasefire deal as it wasn't appropriate. Sorry if it offended anyone. That wasn't my intention. Sorry if it offended anyone. Not sorry that I was massively unprofessional.
Exactly. But this thing, but the idea that in any way is equivalent morally or reporting wise to Hamas staging these just outrageous events, and the Red Cross, International Red Cross, signing these documents, and the filming of this by people, claiming to be independent journalists but clearly aren't. Al Jazeera completely and utterly in cahoots with Hamas on all of this. It is so outrageous, and it's not called out. And actually, as a guest, we had Jake Wallace-Simons on the show yesterday pointing out that every single report from inside Gaza should be, said before that, should be, nothing comes out of Gaza without Hamas approving it. This is therefore, you have to view this as Hamas propaganda. But they never do that.
The thing is that there's been a lot of criticism of Israel for not allowing journalists into Gaza during the war. And I must say, I've tried to get in there myself, and it's not possible. Even on their embeds, they're very strict. But I'll say this, over time, I've come to realise why. Because if you look at how easily duped some of these moronic journalists are. I mean, we saw Liz Doucette running around in Lebanon at one point where there wasn't anyone stopping them being there. She was running around the basement of that hospital where Israel had revealed publicly that Hezbollah had stored gold and money. She was running around the bit of the basement that they had allowed her to, saying, no, there's just a morgue here, it's an ordinary functioning hospital, to the point that Israel actually tweeted out the precise locations of the correct entrance to the correct building. The point is that whether knowingly or unknowingly, journalists would just end up being used as part of the propaganda tools of Hamas. And part of this war is massively a propaganda and information war. So we've seen what happens when they weren't in Gaza. That is this propaganda documentary that they've made for Hamas and for the pro-Palestinian propaganda. It wouldn't have been better if they'd been allowed in. I dare say it would have been worse, because they would have been kidnapped, beaten, bullied, duped, fooled, any number of things. Israel had two very bad choices to choose between. One was to let them in and see them join in the war effort against Israel in the propaganda sense, and the other one was to keep them out and see them do it sort of second-hand from Hamas. The sad fact is that an institution like the BBC, with all its experience and money, ought to know better how to look through these things. If David Collier could figure all that out in a matter of hours after watching the documentary once, if I found, as I outlined on my X, all those editing problems. And the other thing is, if they wanted to make a documentary about the plight of Palestinian children, I've been posting on X all week images that have been coming out after the handovers. We've seen plenty of Palestinian children dancing on the stage where the coffins of children were. Whether they were forced to or not, I don't know, because it is a tyrannical, hideous terrorist regime there. Seen them celebrating, seen them holding guns, dressed in Hamas uniforms. Not one of those children was in the BBC documentary about the experience of children's lives in Gaza. And I would say that's failing the Palestinians as well, because if you don't show how they are abusing their children, children are the only innocents, because children don't have a say in how they're brought up or indoctrinated. And so if you see children being forced to weaponize guns or even their actions in a propaganda film, that is what the BBC as a news gathering organisation should be revealing to the world. It has no commercial obligations not to do so. It could be brave, it could be bold. People ought to be fired over this. There ought to be root and branch reform of how they do their news gathering. They need to clear out any staff who are biased and not doing their job properly here, but none of this will happen. They'll find a way to do a long, boring inquiry in which they dig their heels in even more and deny
and we'll never see the results, as happened before. I mean, again, it's just so blatant to me. If they were equivocating over, for instance, saying, well, the Ku Klux Klan on one side and a black rights group on the other, if they were equivocating there, they'd be out on their ear. But no, it's absolutely fine when it involves Jews. And when it involves Jews, and that's the only time they've got an issue, they haven't got an issue, we call that anti-Semitism. Let's call it what it is. Jonathan Sacerdoti, I so appreciate you joining us, writer and broadcaster Jonathan Sacerdoti there. Claire.